I saw this new video recently by a YouTuber I've already reviewed before, and right off the bat, I was confused because he seems like he's responding to this other guy who's summarizing this other debate between Matt Dillahunty and this other Matthew. But I don't really get why he does this because the video he's responding to is just 90% the debate, so I don't know why he didn't just respond to the debate itself instead of responding to this random video, but okay.
With a goofy, nonsensical hypothetical.
You're about to see one of the most famous atheists on YouTube debate Matthew Adelstein, a theist, on whether or not the fine-tuning of the universe to allow for life to be possible is evidence for God.
If there is an all-powerful God, it wouldn't make sense for the parameters of the universe to be finely tuned to allow life to be possible, because an all-powerful God, by definition, would have the power to put life into a universe with any set of parameters. If an all-powerful God exists, life is possible without the need for anything to be finely tuned.
But this is a bait and switch. No one's saying that God has to finely tune the universe. They're just saying it's at least somewhat expected on theism. Or at the very least, it's more expected on theism than it is on atheism. Therefore, it makes theism more likely than atheism.
Suppose that the initial conditions of the universe spelled out, made by God, with love, in every human language.
What would it mean for the conditions of the universe to spell out anything, let alone in every language? Conditions aren't letters. And how would it spell it in languages? And how would it spell it in languages that died out before writing was invented?
This is just needless nitpicking of an analogy. And again, the specifics of the analogy isn't important. So I don't care what the point of responding to this is. I would let it slide if he made more substantive criticisms of the analogy, but he doesn't.
We had sort of definitive scientific proof that this was not the byproduct of a limited simulator. Like, the only two possibilities were that this was a byproduct purely of chance, or that it was the byproduct of an all-powerful God.
How the hell would you establish that? How could you possibly rule out the idea that the cause is limited in power? That seems like one of those negatives that's impossible to prove. Also, why are the choices narrowed to either an all-powerful God or random chance? If I actually saw such a phenomenon, my first inference would be some cause that is neither chance nor someone all-powerful. The closest thing to God that I might infer is an alien from another universe who created this one, but who is still a finite physical.
In other words, a limited simulator. So exactly what he said. Now, I agree you could theoretically argue it doesn't prove an all-powerful God, but it clearly is at least some evidence for God existing. I mean, that's the whole point of the analogy. If something was so obvious, saying that God exists in every language, that's clearly at least some evidence. On any person's worldview, it's evidence.
Evidence that there was a God.
I'd say it is evidence that the universe was created by something comparable to a human, but I don't see how it could be established that the creator is all-powerful, much less capable of existing independent of all of space and time, as is commonly said of God, because I don't see such a being as even coherent.
Why?
I have no idea. In that particular hypothetical scenario, which, by the way, is not remotely what we have, I think it could be completely understandable why people would reasonably conclude that that was a message from God. I don't understand the in every possible language. I mean, it seems like...
Christ in every language.
How would conditions spell anything in any language? What does that even mean?
Just swap out conditions with stars, and it makes the whole thing clearer, doesn't it?
Okay, I don't know how it's possible to say. So individually, there's like a billion statements there covering every language and dialect, and they all say created with love from God.
Yeah,
at a minimum,
imagine it's really small writing.
Sure, at a minimum, that would make it seem that it's rational to conclude that there is a being capable of doing that, and that may be sufficiently close to God-like for us to not care whether it's the Omnimax God or not.
Insofar as being all-powerful is a necessary condition to the Abrahamic concept of God, it would not be evidence of such a being, because the mere fact that such conditions had to be created by something with the power to create them would in no way imply that such a being has every possible power.
What would exactly be evidence to you for an all-powerful God? And if you think the idea is not coherent, then explain why you don't think it's coherent.
In case it would be really, really incredible evidence that it's more likely that there's a being capable of doing that. Whether or not it's a God is a separate thing.
Okay, and so the reason you would say that it's reasonable to conclude there's a being that can do that is because the odds of that happening by chance are super low, and the odds of it happening if there was a being who wanted to create it are super high, right?
Given that it's not clear what it would even mean for the conditions of the universe to spell anything, it's hard to estimate the odds of that happening by chance, but they would probably be lower than something analogous to a human doing it, because humans are the only known cause of language. My first inference would be that someone was tampering with the instruments that were used to detect such a message. My second inference would be that some type of physical alien from another space-time continuum did it, rather than some all-powerful supernatural being.
Again, just swap out initial conditions with stars. If the stars spelled out God exists in every language, God would be more likely. And how is an interdimensional being any more likely than a supernatural being? Like, even if you use background knowledge, we don't have any background knowledge of an interdimensional being either.
That's sort of the broad picture.
We can't calculate, okay? So, but it seems, given the information we have, that it is less likely for that to happen by chance than by intent. However, we only have one occurrence. And so I don't know how we determined what the odds are for any of this with one occurrence.
We might have to compare the conditions of other universes. Maybe there are millions of other universes and nothing like this appears in any of them, but maybe you see the same message in 50% of them, making the message appearing by chance much more plausible.
Why would that be much more plausible? Wouldn't that just be more evidence that there was a being that created all the universes? But why would something like that happen by chance? I mean, I just feel like you're missing the whole point of the
How's that
analogy.
scenario different from fine-tuning? Like, in the case of the initial conditions being that way, you say, look, it's so unlikely it would be that way by chance.
I think there's a meaningful difference between a message being spelled out that meant the same thing in every language, and a set of conditions that don't do that, even if they are very unlikely, because other conditions are not so analogous to language that, as far as we know, only comes from human beings.
I mean, it's not exactly the same. The whole point is, if you don't accept fine-tuning as evidence, then by that same reasoning, you wouldn't accept the stars spelling out God as evidence. So the whole point is to show how that response is flawed.
Because even though there's no reason to expect that God would definitely do it that way, you think maybe there's a reason God would do it that way, and it's so unlikely to happen by chance that a designer doing it is the best explanation.
You're arbitrarily leaving out a third option, which is that the conditions we have are the only possible ones. The mere fact that we can imagine the parameters of the universe being different is not a reason to believe they actually could be. The biggest difference between this guy's hypothetical situation and what we actually see is that in his imagined scenario, all natural causes have somehow been ruled out. In reality, we have not ruled out a naturalistic explanation for why the parameters of the universe are what they are.
No, it actually follows exactly with the analogy. The analogy also responds to that point as well, because if the constants of fine-tuning have to be necessary, or they could be necessary, and you don't know if they could be any different, then it would also follow that the stars spelling out God exist also would have to be necessary, and we don't know if it could be any different or not. So the analogy also responds to that point as well. There's nothing being left out.
Now, just a few moments, we're going to see why Matt Dillahunty walks right into a big inconsistency. But first, notice his response to the hypothetical. If it were written made by God, though that would be ridiculously improbable, and maybe that's not even the right term, Dillahunty thinks it doesn't compare to fine-tuning arguments because those human languages wouldn't be written until much later, billions of years later, and as a result, it would be impossible for them to be there from the beginning unless there was some intelligence behind it.
No, it wouldn't be impossible, just improbable.
We'll see what Adelstein thinks about that in just a minute. But first, Dillahunty's going to try and push on this notion that perhaps life could have emerged even if the fundamental constants had been different. Adelstein presses Dillahunty to put his money where his mouth is on that suggestion.
Well, if there is an all-powerful God, then he would have the power to put life into a universe with any set of conditions.
Yes. Again, fine-tuning isn't 100% predicted by theism, but it is more likely on theism than naturalism. I mean, I wouldn't say it's just as likely that God would create a universe with constants and then deliberately make life that doesn't adhere to the constants. I don't think that's a very likely scenario, so that's not as likely as God creating a finely tuned universe, but still, neither of them are impossible for God to do, but it's just much more likely on theism than naturalism, because naturalism can't really predict fine-tuning all that well.
You could change some of the constants, you could change things, and have a different universe crop up, where a different set of life forms would be considering how the universe was created for them. The difference between your fine-tuning and this hypothetical message is that your fine-tuning is predicated on the notion that we are the goal, rather than what we are, which is what can evolve in the system.
So, Matt, what are some of the examples of fine-tuning that are cited by theists that if the constants were to be changed, you think you could get a different kind of life? Like, for example, do you think that about the cosmological constant? Do you think that about the Higgs mass?
If there is an all-powerful God, then he would have the power to put some kind of life into a universe if any or all of the constants were different. It's only if there is no all-powerful God that it could be true that life is not possible if the constants were different. The central premise of the fine-tuning argument, that life would be impossible if the parameters of the universe were even slightly different, could only be true if an all-powerful God does not exist.
True. That's why the fine-tuning argument works so well, because if God didn't exist, most of the universes would just be filled with non-life, or no matter at all. But our universe is filled with matter, which is why fine-tuning is such a good argument against naturalism. So let's think of it more of an internal critique of naturalism, which is why it says that most of the constants wouldn't be able to support life under naturalism, which is why it's an argument against naturalism.
I have no idea. I'm not even convinced that those things could... I'm sorry, what?
Well, sorry, so what you decided was that, look, if you change the constants, you could get life arising under different conditions, and then there's different kinds of life. Yeah, and then you said there's different kinds of life, and they would be wondering to themselves, oh, it's so surprising we got them. So I'm asking which constants you could change where you get different kinds of life. You think that about cosmological constant? Do you think that about Higgs mass? Which one is this true of?
Sean Carroll was asked this question by William Lane Craig, and here was his answer.
It is not at all convincing. I will give you 5 quick reasons why theism does not offer a solution to the purported fine-tuning problem. First, I am by no means convinced that there is a fine-tuning problem. And again, Dr. Craig offered no evidence for it. It is certainly true that if you change the parameters of nature, our local conditions that we observe around us would change by a lot. I grant that quickly. I do not grant that therefore life could not exist. I will start granting that once someone tells me the conditions under which life can exist. What is the definition of life, for example? If it's just information processing, thinking, or something like that, there's a huge panoply of possibilities. They sound very science fiction-y, but then again, you're the one who's changing the parameters of the universe. The results are going to sound like they come from a science fiction novel. Sadly, we just don't know whether life could exist if the conditions of our universe were very different because we only see the universe that we see.
Yeah, that was his answer. It wasn't a good answer, but it was his answer. Because obviously, regardless of your definition of life, you can't have life without atoms, in a physical universe.
We're a little stronger, everything would have flown apart much less than 1 millisecond after the Big Bang started.
And how would that make life impossible? I understand that atoms wouldn't be able to form the same way, but why assume that atoms are necessary for life? They certainly wouldn't be if there were an all-powerful God, so why would such a God need to finely tune the universe to such a precise cosmological constant?
Here it is again. God doesn't need to finely tune the universe. He can create it in many different ways. This is just one of the ways he could choose. But it's more likely on theism that there would be some kind of fine-tuning than on naturalism, because on naturalism, it's just so low. Which is why even if theism doesn't 100% predict fine-tuning, it can still moderately explain it better than naturalism can.